The gang violence that binds the U.S. and El Salvador, today on The World. I'm Marco Werman. Gangs in the U.S. and El Salvador offer members a sense of belonging, and both governments need to offer alternatives.
Until they provide those opportunities to those kids that need them, and they give them the hope and the sense of safety and belonging, that these kids need, the gangs are just going to continue in filling those voids.
Plus, President Obama heads to Hiroshima as Japan and the U.S. try to figure out how to talk about the past.
Societies have to decide, whether consciously or subconsciously, how much you remember and how much you put aside.
And a survivor of the Bataclan in Paris remembers the man who helped him and others escape.
He's a guy who managed to get up, and he went back in.
That's all today here on The World. I'm Marco Werman. This is The World. What happens in Central America doesn't always stay in Central America. It also has an impact here in the United States. And that's where we start things today on the show, specifically how gang violence in El Salvador has repercussions here in the U.S. That violence has pushed many Salvadorans to flee their country and come north, or to send their children alone on that journey to the U.S.-Mexico border. A huge factor behind all this are the street gangs in El Salvador and the unraveling of a truce between the country's two main gangs. That's led to a new spike in El Salvador's murder rate. And the current government has responded by arresting several people who were involved in, get this, negotiating that truce back in 2012. Sounds crazy, right? More on that in a moment. First, let's go back a few years to hear what it was like when rival gang members actually agreed to sit face-to-face to make a deal.
These guys have attacked each other's families, and some of the crimes are absolutely horrific. So you can imagine the reluctance to get into the same room together.
That's Adam Blackwell, a former official with the Organization of American States, the OAS. He worked with the committee that guaranteed the truce.
These guys are, hated each other. Just getting them in the same room, despite the odio, as we say in Spanish, or the absolute palpable hatred, I think is one of the positive steps, getting them to look each other in the eye and realize that the level of barbarity had to stop.
Tell us about one of those moments where, people who hated each other sat down in the same room. You were there. What was that like?
It was frightening, frankly. We're in this prison room, and you had these guys who, frankly, don't look like somebody you'd want to have tea with. And, they were shaking their fist at each other. They wouldn't address each other by names. It was very tense, very tense. But calmer heads prevailed, and I think this is one of the lasting successes of this process, is that we were able to get them together. Could probably do so again if called upon.
Well, now El Salvador's government's going after the same people who brokered the truce. I mean, that sounds crazy. Why is that happening?
I don't think there's any other, reason other than political. These folks working with me, well-intentioned, most of them fairly low to mid-level bureaucrats. I can assure you didn't break any laws in front of me or with me. We were just trying in a situation with high moral hazard to bring peace.
So now El Salvador's government has issued arrest warrants for 21 people who participated in negotiating the truce. Who are these 21 people?
Well, you've got Raul Muhango, who's the figurehead of this group. He's one of the core mediators, a former guerrilla FMLN member. The others are mostly former prison managers or even some of the psychotherapists who are trying to deal with some of the behavior issues. So it's a fairly eclectic group. As I said earlier, a sort of mid to lower level bureaucrats, which indicates to me that they're just trying to look for scapegoats and not come after me or the 11 mayors of the municipalities that were involved or the ministers who were involved or any of the other sort of senior political figures.
Do you think the truce gave gangs legitimacy they didn't deserve, blurring the lines between authorities and criminals?
Oh, that's been one of the common criticisms. I mean, I think the gangs had legitimacy before. They grew up in Los Angeles. They were deported back. They formed in El Salvador and other countries of Central America. They have their own recruiting mechanism, their own culture, their own discipline, their own sense of identity. Political parties and others had tried to negotiate with them in the past. So what we were doing really wasn't new or giving them any broader exposure than they'd had in the past. What we did do that was different was getting them all together in the same place and trying to find a parallel process for each of the